A very good evening to you. You're watching Newsfirst in Focus, and we've headed into a new financial year. And with this new year, there comes a looming problem about a new tax bill being introduced without any consensus of the stakeholders. Well, to discuss about it, we've got the Director of Tax at the PricewaterhouseCoopers, Charmaine Tilakratna. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Well, let's start off with the tax bill, and that's our main concern today on the program. That's our main focus. The budget proposal of last year spelled out that a new tax bill will be introduced, a new tax act will be introduced, replacing completely the old one. But, however, the Minister of Finance waited until the last minute of the last financial year to bring in the bill and to get it approved through the cabinet and then to present it to Parliament, which we still haven't seen happening. Why is there such a rush to bring it in?
Well, Stephanie, like you said, this was a budget proposal that was introduced last year. And to be fair, it's actually been discussed quite some time, the introduction of a new act to simplify our current tax system. So one of the main objectives of introducing the act is to simplify our current tax system. Having said that, like you said, it's an introduction of a completely new act. It will take some time, the drafting of it. The language has changed. And to move away from what we have been used to all these years and to introduce something new will of course take time. So perhaps ideally it should have been introduced by April because the new fiscal year, like you said, starts in April. The delay may be because of the fact that it's a new act and it's complicated, so it's a little it takes time even for the legal draftsman or the drafters to draft this new piece of legislation. So I have no exact answer as to why it is late, but my thoughts are it's probably because drafting is not a simple act.
But there's also a lot of speculation and a lot of charges of how this bill was brought into cabinet without even public discourse, especially with the main stakeholders of the ones who will be actually investing in the domestic market. Right. Is that one of the factors that should be considered when bringing in a new bill?
Yes, well, certainly. I mean, as I said earlier, one objective was to simplify the tax system. Another objective was to broaden the tax base and take out unnecessary tax exemptions and improve our direct to indirect tax ratio. But having said that, when it comes to withdrawing concessions, you have concessions that some are essential. Some are nice to have. Some maybe can be taken out. But it's important to identify that, go through a process and identify those three categories before completely withdrawing. Now, at the moment, what we see is the exemptions that were given in the current act from Section 7 to 13 have been completely withdrawn, and together with some other sections as well. So
without a consultation of any of the stakeholders?
Yes, so it's best that we get the views of various stakeholders, because otherwise what we will see happening is the act may go through, it may be passed, but we'll have various groups lobbying again in the future, saying, it affects them, this is unfair, or so on and so forth, and there'll be various lobbying starting, and then again we will have to see another set of amendments coming to this new act, which was just only introduced. So maybe one of the reasons for the delay in the implementation is that they are going to go through this process.
So they've already made up their minds to introduce this brand new act?
Yes.
Without the consultation of any of the...
Yes, they've made up their minds to introduce a brand new act. There is still time to get the consensus of the public and the various stakeholders. Perhaps the delay may be that they are moving towards that.
Which means the new financial year will not actually see this brand new act come into fruition. It will be somewhere halfway through the financial year that this tax will be imposed on corporates and individuals.
Yes, it could be halfway through. We don't know. That's up to the policymakers. But a concern would be to not make it retrospective, with retrospective effect, because this is a new act. So, backdating it or making it retrospectively would not be a good thing. People need time to read and understand it. So, I don't know whether, generally, it is never, we've always introduced it at the beginning of the the fiscal year. It has not been done midway. But if it is to be done midway, let's hope that it's at least midway and not with retrospective effect, which I don't think would be. But so far, it won't be effective 1st of April.
Well, Charmaine, you're the Director of Tax at the PricewaterhouseCoopers, and you would have seen multiple bills being proposed, before they've been proposed, coming to your attention. What are the top alarming factors of this particular bill? Are you concerned about certain clauses, certain provisions on the bill? Do you see it as completely going off direction?
So it's a move to simplification, which is good, but then we need to look at the full scheme of the act, the overall scheme of things. And like I said, the language is different, the flow of the act is different to what we are used to now. So if there were, I would say, if anything is to be alarming, it's just not only one particular provision, but we need to look at the whole thing. So we need to identify those with a little bit more discussion with the stakeholders, and so that we can avoid future amendments. I believe there have been various forums bringing up certain suggestions from time to time, which have been incorporated in these various drafts. As of now, we do not have sort of an official draft. None of the ministries of the relevant policymakers have not issued an official draft. It's something that people seem to, it's around the domain and people are commenting, and each time some of these drafts change. So perhaps if we could have an official version first, and then we call for comments on that, then we can avoid a lot of the speculation that is also going around. I've seen on various social media platforms, people are making various comments, some sweeping comments, some which are not true, probably because they've not seen the right draft, or they're just repeating something that was heard. So it would be good if all that doubt could be done away with, if we can have an official discussion on that.
The failure to have public discourse remains one of the main concerns of the bill itself. But when we come back, we'll discuss as to what the fate of this bill is. Well, welcome back. You're watching BizFirst in Focus. We are in a new financial year, and with the dawn of the new fiscal year, there comes an alarming factor of this new tax bill that's being introduced to the country, that is later to be introduced in the future. Well, to discuss about it, we've got the Director of Tax at the PricewaterhouseCoopers, Charmaine Tilakaratne. Thank you very much for joining us. Well, we discussed earlier there being speculations, and one of the main speculations that's in the air is that this could be one of the efforts by the government to bring in about $1.5 billion from the IMF, and this is indeed a structural reform that's been proposed by the IMF itself. And there's also this major speculation of this model reflecting a copycat version of the Ghana IMF model for tax collection. Why is there so much of speculation, and has the government actually given room for speculation because of their failure to bring it to the public domain?
Yeah, I've seen that the speculation, or rather the comment made again in the various news platforms, that this is a copy of the Ghana Act, which was introduced by IMF to Ghana. I myself, I'm unable to comment on that, but I'm sure that can be easily dispelled if we do take a look at the Ghana Act. But again, yes, as I mentioned, probably the sort of the lack of communication or the thought process behind the introduction of the new act and the various steps taken to it are not disclosed, people are, doing their sort of their own research and their own speculation, their own ideas as to why the certain things are about, and which may not even be true. There may be a solid reason behind it. So the best way is to get rid of all this speculation is to, like I said, have an open forum discussion.
Well, this bill is supposed to serve one main purpose of bringing in revenue, as any other tax bill would want to do. But one of the main concerns there is in the offing is that this bill will not necessarily bring in more revenue or more tax revenue as speculated or as the officers wanted, because last year we heard the finance minister speak about how total revenue of the government itself only entails about 20% of direct taxes, and this bill is supposed to really round out that and bring in more into the government reserves. But do you think, given the complexity of this and given the difficult terminology used in this, this could be done anytime soon after its introduction?
So one of the other objectives of introducing this act is to increase the number of sources of taxation. So one new source that they're bringing in is the capital gains tax, which is supposed to contribute to the government's revenue as given the figures in the last year's budget. It's too early to say that the act will not achieve its objective. Certainly they have brought in steps. I mean, now the act is in two parts. Part one is where you do the part one is where the taxable sources and the taxing of the if your income is handled, and the part two is where the tax administration is. And that's done that way, so to improve the administration effectively, the tax office administration, to increase the collection of taxes. So we can't at this point say, it may not, that their goals will not be achieved. It's too early. But certainly the new introductions are stepping or aiming towards increasing that 80 to 20 ratio you were talking about, because they've introduced, like I said, capital gains tax, they've increased the tax rate, personal tax rates, and so on. So the draft is in line with what the government proposed at the last budget. We just need to see how the implementation will go. And so we need to wait and see.
Well, having a look at the tax bill itself, the draft bill itself, Charmaine, just tell us whether you had any sort of aha moment as to which really got you to think that maybe this is going to work out for the best.
Yes, certainly there are some good points. I mean, if I were to just make an example, one is in the personal income taxation side, where if you have income which is not business income, personal income, you can actually declare your income and pay taxes on a cash basis. That is, you declare your income only when you receive it, or an expenditure you recognize it only when you incur it. Whereas in the past we go on accrual basis, so which sometimes is a little complicated for a lay individual, keeping accounts and maintaining books, even if in a simpler form. So that then the tendency is not to declare it at all. But if you are to declare it on a cash basis, that is only when you get it, it's more simple and something that people may be more inclined to do. So there are good points like that, that the simplification is there. But just needs to be a little bit analyzed in more detail.
So does this bill really, is it inclined towards bringing in investors, attracting foreign investors? Do you see it being inclined to that, or is it just to benefit the overall mass of the country, the overall citizenry itself?
It's not aimed at any particular segment of the community. It just has that overall broad three principles: to simplify, to broaden the tax base, increase the tax sources. That is there. So that is there in the act. It needs to maybe.
Does it really simplify everything? Does it break it down than what it had before? As in, the bills that we've seen before has had a lot of complexity. That's one of the reasons why corporates do not understand or can't get their head around it, right? But does this new bill really simplify, and does it really, do you see that drastic contrast from the last few bills that we've had in those terms?
Yes, it's a complete overhaul. So there is a big difference between what we have and what we are going to introduce. But as to whether it's going to be simple or more complex will depend on how the community is able to digest it and understand it. And that is why I'm repeating it again, that we just need to have a better analysis. Perhaps then we could maybe change or suggest some improvements. Maybe that is why it's being delayed. We don't know. I don't know what is behind the thinking.
Well, let's head into a short commercial break, but when we come back, we'll have more on BizFirst in Focus. A very good evening to you. You're watching BizFirst in Focus, and I'm in conversation with Shamin Tilakaratne, the Director of Tax and the PricewaterhouseCoopers. Thank you very much for joining us again. Well, we've come to the final 5 minutes of the program. But before we wrap up, I think it's important that we touch on the concessions and the incentives given by the tax bill itself. You mentioned earlier it doesn't really give much incentives, but one of the alarming factors of the one of the provisions is that no concessions or exemptions will be given for EPF and ETF beneficiaries. So mainly targeting EPF and ETF of employees in the country. My question to you is whether this will discourage people into getting into the formal market. Because informal market, there's no EPF in ETF. There you can benefit through the means of your wages itself. But will this really discourage people into getting into the formal market? And when you come to think of it, if this is going to discourage people into getting into the formal market, which eventually would defeat the purpose, because much of the money is not going to go into the books of the government. It's going to go elsewhere. It's going to be in circulation outside of it. So will this really defeat the purpose of generating revenue?
See, Stephanie, this is a good example of speculation I was speaking to you about earlier, because the latest draft available, you'll find that the EPF and the ETF is not taxed. It's actually exempt. I believe, I think this speculation started about the EPF, ETF being taxed because some of the previous drafts didn't contain this as an exemption. But in fact, the latest draft now has it as part of the exempt schedule. The payments of your EPF and ETF will not be taxed. Currently, also under the current act, we are not taxed. And that same exemption has been continued in the latest draft.
So it will be completely safe from any imposition of
tax? As available at the moment in the draft, which I don't think, I don't see a reason for it to change. It was not a budget proposal. It's given under the terminal benefits, but then at the same time there is a corresponding exempt schedule. It's listed out in the exempt schedule. So this is a good example of that speculation and on social media and the various social platforms. Some of it, like I say, is correct. Some of it is not, because there have been also several drafts being circulated. But I believe the latest draft carries the exemption.
So last year's budget proposal had certain sort of provisions through taxes, corporate taxes, individual taxes, but those the numbers won't change through the bill. Will it change?
No, the proposals as was introduced will be implemented in the...
Will be implemented.
So we have the three-tier structure for corporate taxes that has been implemented.
So there has not been any changes?
No deviation from that.
No deviation from it. So which means the laws and the means of which the imposition of taxes are concerned, it's different to what it was before, and that's the only change you can speculate right at this moment.
So it's the some of the things that were changed are the exemptions. Some of the exemptions have gone off. Most of the budget proposals that were introduced last November have been incorporated, and the scheme of the Act has now changed.
So how exactly is the government planning on really generating revenue through tax collection? What sort of means are they planning on using through this bill?
So two things. One is they've introduced additional sources, like I said, the capital gains tax. Second thing is they hope to really improve tax administration, the efficiency and collection of taxes. and third is to broad base the tax and collect from more people. So the intention and the directions are there.
But the mechanism is different.
Mechanism is different.
Well, thank you very much for joining us, Charmin. It was an absolute pleasure having you with us. Well, that was Charmin Tilakratne, the Director of Tax at the PricewaterhouseCoopers, here to dissect. She really dissected and gave an autopsy about the new tax bill. And next week we'll have a new guest on Newsfirst in Focus. I'm Stephanie Lazarus signing off.